Bowie meant a lot to everyone, you know, who loves music. His vision of the world and the way that he reached out to people who didn't seem to fit in was really important.
If David Bowie were alive and he saw that Blackstar was going to #1 in the United States, I think he would have thought two things. He would have thought, A, either am I dead, or he would have thought record sales must really be hurting.
I think it might surprise people that Bowie never had a #1 album before. It's one of the few honors he'd yet to make.
It actually is surprising that he never had a #1 record before. You would think in the 70s during his peak he probably would have come through with a #1, or when the Let's Dance album came out.
It is crazy that David Bowie never had a #1 album. You're also talking about the single most innovative and influential mainstream artist of the last 40 years. Even some of his later 80s records like Tonight and things like that. I think Let's Dance was #4.
Lo and behold, it took unforeseen circumstances for him to have his first #1.
Blackstar is such an odd album.
It's also his best reviewed record probably in over 30 years.
It is not a pop record. It's really edgy and haunting and dark and all the things that a lot of his best work from the 70s was.
It really shows how much people love Bowie, and so deep into his career, how much impact he can still have.
What you're seeing now is just how vast his influence was.
I think based on all the conversation we're seeing on social media, and just all the pop culture buzz, we might just be at the beginning of a real celebration of Bowie's music, and certainly on Billboard charts as well.
The fact that it's #1 is crazy on all kinds of levels, but I'm so glad that so many people are going to get to hear it, even though some 12-year-old might say, who was David Bowie, and put on that record and be terrified, which might not be a bad thing either.
All kind of factors came in to make this a #1 debut for him.
He peaked at #2 as a previous high in 2013 with The Next Day, but he's been having top 10 albums back since 1974.
He had quite a few top 10 hits and a few #1 singles, but his 1969 to 1980 body of work is untouchable.
Very few artists have had that kind of longevity. You're talking about people like Paul McCartney, James Taylor, Elvis Presley.
The Beatles and Dylan and people like that.
You can look at the chart and sort of not know if you're looking at a chart from the 70s or 2016. That's just how really endless his impact is. It's probably clear that there's a lot of longtime Bowie fans who are just loving that he gave us one last gift, as well as younger fans who've discovered his music, and probably a lot of people who just this week have heard so much about Bowie, maybe for the first time, and want to find out all about his great art.
Death is unfortunately good for business.
Right after he passed, we saw on iTunes early song sales completely, David Bowie albums and songs suddenly right at the top of the iTunes charts.
I mean, almost any time an artist dies, you know, their catalog sales immediately uptick.
John Lennon, back in 1980, he had a #1 album with Double Fantasy right after he died. The Notorious B.I.G. in the 90s, Ray Charles in the 2000s. Michael Jackson, one of the biggest examples, went to #1 with his album, This Is It. And that stayed in the top 40 for a few months. So we might be just at the beginning of a real celebration of Bowie, just overall and on Billboard's charts.
Bowie very much wanted to be a star. There's no question about that. He was very driven to it. He wanted to be a success, and it was some 10 years before he actually broke through as Ziggy Stardust.
Ziggy Stardust was the thing that kicked it all off, really, for him.
Let's Dance was his big, global, I'm gonna be a megastar album. It is very much a pop album. Consequently, it's lacking a lot of the edge of some of his previous records. He went on to make several pop records, and he said not long after that that it felt sort of hollow to him. Now, he didn't quite get his mojo back the way he had it before, but sadly, I actually saw a lot of that coming back with Blackstar. I really feel like it's his best and most innovative album since Scary Monsters, in that sense, in terms of being an adventurous David Bowie artist. And it was so exciting to hear him again. I heard the song Blackstar. It was just like, oh my God, after all these years, he's back. David Bowie's producer, Tony Visconti, who he'd worked with on and off since the 60s, has said that Bowie said this, he's referred to it as a parting gift.
Well, it seems like he wanted to be remembered in a particular way.
Bowie knew he was dying. He went about it in the classiest and most British way imaginable. Don't make a fuss. Obviously, mortality was very much on his mind with this album.
You know, it's a very death-obsessed record. It's really interesting. I can't think of any artist who ever kind of played themselves out, you know, that way.
Tony Visconti has since said that Bowie thought he had a few months and had demoed maybe 5 more songs and wanted to make another record. People who don't know what they're talking about are saying it's like, oh, he planned it. Well, he didn't plan it. I think probably in the back of his mind he was thinking, if this is my last statement, as he made it. There are references to death and skulls and tombstones, and the first line of one of the songs is "Here I Am Up in Heaven." It's a very dark record that is made by someone who is very aware of his mortality.
I think it's important for his legacy, actually. You know, most artists don't put out their best work at age 69 or records that are considered among their best work.
So many last records are just like, you know, and this one's not. It's the most innovative record he'd made in 35 years. As a fan, it's, I don't know if satisfying is the word, but it's nice that he went out with such a good record.
For him to have done so on his own terms, made a very challenging record, made one that people can read into and find kind of hidden messages about his life and death, is pretty special. You know, I can't think of any other artist who was able to orchestrate their final recording in quite this way.
It was the old Bowie back, and it is a beautiful sort of epigraph on his career, and I love it that he went out with a record this good.
If I'll never see the English evergreens I'm running to, it's nothing to me.